Imagine losing your job on the exact same morning your daughter needs an operation that costs more money than you have ever held in your bank account. Imagine standing in a parking lot in the freezing rain, holding a cardboard box with everything you own from a desk you worked at for 11 years, while the woman who signed your termination letter drives past you in a car worth more than your entire life savings. Now imagine, 4 years later, that same woman walks through the front door of the small cafe you built from nothing, sits down at your counter, and does not recognize you at first. What happens next changes both of their lives forever, and if you stay until the very end, you will understand why this story has made grown men cry in their cars, in their kitchens, and in their offices late at night. Before we continue, comment below and tell me where you are watching this video from. I love seeing how far these stories travel, and I read every single comment. Daniel Carter woke up every day at 5 in the morning long before this story begins, because that was simply who he was. He was a man who believed that quiet effort, done every single day without complaint, was the only real way to build a life. For 11 years, he worked as a logistics coordinator at Hale Industries, a large shipping and distribution company based in Columbus, Ohio. He was not the loudest person in the office. He was not the one who took credit in meetings. He was the one who stayed late to fix problems nobody else wanted to touch, and the one who trained new employees without ever asking for recognition. Daniel was raising his daughter, Lily, alone. Her mother had passed away 3 years earlier from a sudden illness, and since then, it had been just the two of them in a small rented house on the edge of town. Lily was 8 years old, full of questions, and she loved drawing pictures of birds because her mother once told her that birds always find their way home, no matter how far they fly. Daniel kept every single drawing Lily made in a shoebox under his bed, and some nights, after she fell asleep, he would take them out just to remind himself why he worked so hard. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in early spring. Hale Industries announced a company-wide restructuring plan led by its newly appointed Chief Executive Officer, Victoria Hale, the granddaughter of the company founder. Victoria had taken over the company only 6 months earlier after her father stepped down due to health problems, and she was determined to prove to the board of directors that she could cut costs and increase profits faster than anyone expected. She commissioned a report that recommended eliminating an entire department, the same department where Daniel had worked faithfully for over a decade. Daniel found out he was losing his job through a short email sent at 8 in the morning, informing him that his position was no longer needed and that his last day would be that Friday. There was no meeting. There was no conversation. There was only a signature at the bottom of the email, and that signature belonged to Victoria Hale. He remembered standing in the break room holding his coffee, reading the email twice, then a third time, hoping the words would somehow change. They did not change. By Friday afternoon, he was carrying a small box of his belongings across the parking lot when a black car drove past him, slow enough for him to see the driver clearly through the tinted glass. It was Victoria Hale, dressed in a sharp navy suit, looking down at her phone, completely unaware of the man standing in the rain just a few feet away, a man whose entire world she had just changed with the click of a button. That night, Daniel sat at the kitchen table long after Lily had gone to bed, staring at a small stack of bills and a severance check that would not last more than 2 months. He thought about applying for another logistics job, but something inside him had shifted. He kept thinking about an old, abandoned cafe on Maple Street that had been closed for nearly 3 years, ever since the previous owner retired and could not find a buyer. Daniel used to walk past it every single morning on his way to work, and every single morning he imagined what it would look like if someone gave it a second chance. The following week, Daniel visited the property owner and learned that the building was being sold for far less than he expected, mostly because nobody wanted to take on the risk of an old, run-down cafe in a small town. He spent 3 nights unable to sleep, doing calculations again and again on a notepad, trying to convince himself that this was not a foolish decision made out of desperation. In the end, he decided that if he was going to struggle either way, he would rather struggle while building something of his own than struggle while waiting for another company to decide his fate. He used almost all of his severance pay and savings to purchase the building. His sister, Grace, who lived 2 towns over, lent him a small amount of money as well, though she made him promise he would not tell anyone, because she did not want him to feel like he owed her anything beyond friendship. Daniel spent the next 2 months repairing the cafe almost entirely by himself. He repainted the walls a warm shade of cream, repaired the old wooden tables with his own hands, and fixed the broken sign outside that once read Rosewood Café, restoring it to its original charm. Lily helped him choose the colors for the window frames, and together they picked a soft yellow that she said reminded her of sunflowers. Money was tight almost immediately. Daniel worked from early morning until late at night, baking bread, brewing coffee, and cooking simple meals that reminded people of home-cooked comfort food. In the beginning, there were days when only 2 or 3 customers walked through the door, and Daniel would stand behind the counter wondering if he had made the biggest mistake of his life. There were nights when he counted coins from the tip jar just to buy enough groceries for the week, and there were nights when he sat outside on the back steps after closing, staring at the stars, wondering how he would explain to his daughter if this business failed completely. But Daniel never let Lily see his fear. Every morning, he woke up early, made her breakfast, walked her to school, and then opened the cafe by 7. Every evening, he closed the shop, picked her up from his sister's house where she stayed after school, and made sure they had dinner together at the same small table every single night. He believed that consistency, more than anything else, was the greatest gift he could give her. Slowly, the town began to notice Rosewood Café. A local school teacher named Marissa Bennett stopped in one morning because she smelled fresh cinnamon bread from the sidewalk, and she became a regular customer within a week. An elderly man named Harold Whitfield, who used to visit the cafe decades earlier with his late wife, began coming in every single morning for coffee, saying that Daniel's coffee tasted exactly like it did when the cafe first opened many years before. Word began to spread, not because of advertising, but because of the way Daniel treated every person who walked through his door like they mattered. One rainy afternoon, a young food blogger named Casey Monroe walked into Rosewood Café simply to escape the storm outside. She ordered a cup of coffee and a slice of banana bread, and within minutes, she was completely captivated, not just by the food, but by the story Daniel casually shared about restoring the cafe after losing his job. Casey posted a short article online titled, "A Father, a Daughter, and a Second Chance called Rosewood Café." The article spread across social media faster than anyone expected, and within a single week, Rosewood Café went from a quiet corner shop to a place people were driving from other towns just to visit. Daniel hired his first employee, a young man named Tyler Grayson, who had recently graduated high school and was struggling to find work. Then he hired Marissa's cousin, a friendly woman named Denise Whitmore, who quickly became like family. Business grew steadily, and within a year, Rosewood Café expanded its seating area and added a small outdoor patio where children could sit and draw pictures while their parents enjoyed their meals. Daniel framed some of Lily's bird drawings and hung them on the cafe walls, and customers often asked about the artist, smiling when Daniel proudly explained that the artist was his daughter. Despite the growing success, Daniel never forgot how difficult those first few months had been, and he never forgot the reason he ended up on Maple Street in the first place. Sometimes, late at night, he still thought about that black car driving past him in the rain. He did not feel hatred toward Victoria Hale, but he often wondered if she ever thought about the people whose lives were affected by decisions made in a boardroom far removed from the real consequences. Meanwhile, life had taken an unexpected turn for Victoria Hale as well. The very cost-cutting strategy she implemented to impress the board of directors eventually led to a public relations disaster. Several long-term clients left the company after learning how many experienced employees had been let go, and profits, instead of increasing, began to decline sharply. Investors grew nervous, and within 2 years, Victoria found herself removed from her position as chief executive officer by the very board that once praised her aggressive strategy. Victoria withdrew from public life for a while, spending months trying to understand where everything had gone wrong. She had grown up believing that success was measured purely in numbers, efficiency, and profit margins, a mindset passed down from her father and grandfather. Losing her position forced her to confront a truth she had never wanted to face, that leadership without compassion eventually collapses under its own weight. One afternoon, nearly 4 years after Daniel lost his job, Victoria was driving through a small town on her way to visit an old family friend when her car began experiencing engine trouble. She pulled over near a quiet street lined with small local shops, and while waiting for roadside assistance, she noticed a warm, inviting cafe with a wooden sign reading Rosewood Café. Feeling tired and slightly overwhelmed, she decided to step inside for a cup of coffee while she waited. The cafe was busy but peaceful, filled with the comforting smell of fresh baked bread and the quiet sound of conversation. Victoria sat down at the counter, ordered a simple coffee, and glanced around at the framed drawings of birds hanging on the walls. She felt an odd sense of warmth in the space, something she could not quite explain. When the man behind the counter turned around to hand her the coffee, their eyes met, and for a brief moment, neither of them said a word. Daniel recognized her immediately. Victoria studied his face carefully, searching her memory, and slowly, the realization settled over her. She remembered the name from an old termination file, a face she had seen briefly among hundreds of employees affected by a decision she made in a boardroom years earlier. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the coffee cup down. There was a long pause between them, filled with the quiet hum of the cafe around them. Finally, Victoria spoke first, her voice soft and uncertain. She said she remembered him, and she asked if this was the same cafe she had heard about from a friend, the one built by a father who lost his corporate job. Daniel nodded slowly. He did not raise his voice, and he did not express anger. He simply told her that losing that job had been the hardest moment of his life, but it had also led him to build something that mattered far more to him than any title or salary ever had. He explained that every table, every wall, and every recipe in that cafe represented nights of fear and mornings of hope, all built for the sake of his daughter. Victoria listened carefully, and for the first time in years, she felt the full weight of decisions she had once viewed only as numbers on a spreadsheet. She apologized, not with rehearsed corporate language, but with genuine humility, admitting that she had never truly understood the human cost behind those decisions until that very moment. She told Daniel that losing her position at Hale Industries had forced her to reconsider everything she believed about leadership, and that sitting in his cafe, surrounded by warmth and community he had built with his own hands, taught her more about real success than any boardroom ever had. Daniel offered her a second cup of coffee, and they sat together for nearly an hour, talking honestly about the choices that shaped both of their lives. Before leaving, Victoria asked if she could return sometime, not as the former chief executive officer of Hale Industries, but simply as a customer who appreciated a warm cup of coffee and an honest conversation. Daniel smiled and told her that Rosewood Café was open to everyone, regardless of the past. Over the following months, Victoria became a quiet regular at the cafe, often sitting near the window with a book, sometimes offering small pieces of business advice to Daniel when he asked, never expecting anything in return. She eventually invested a small amount of her own personal savings into helping Daniel open a second location in a neighboring town, though she made it clear that the decision to expand belonged entirely to him. She said she simply wanted to be part of something built on honesty, something she had forgotten was possible in the business world she once dominated. Lily, now 12 years old, continued drawing birds, and one of her newest drawings hung proudly near the entrance of the second Rosewood Café location, with a small handwritten note beneath it that read, "Birds always find their way home." Daniel often looked at that drawing when he opened the shop each morning, reminded of everything he had overcome to reach that moment. Years later, Rosewood Café became known throughout the region, not simply for its food, but for the story behind it. A story about a single father who turned heartbreak into purpose, and a woman who learned that true leadership begins with understanding the people affected by every decision made at the top. Daniel never forgot the lesson those difficult years taught him, that consistency, patience, and quiet determination could rebuild a life from almost nothing. Victoria never forgot the lesson that Daniel unknowingly taught her, that success without compassion is nothing more than an empty number on a page. There was a particular winter, during the second year of Rosewood Café, that Daniel still remembers as the hardest test of his resolve. A large chain coffee shop opened only a few blocks away, offering discounted prices and a flashy new building with bright lights and modern furniture. Within weeks, Daniel noticed fewer familiar faces walking through his door in the mornings. Some regular customers admitted, almost apologetically, that they had tried the new shop simply out of curiosity. Daniel felt his stomach tighten every time he saw the parking lot of the new chain store filled with cars while his own cafe sat quiet. He considered lowering his prices to compete, but his sister Grace reminded him of something important during a phone call one evening. She told him that people did not fall in love with Rosewood Café because of low prices. They fell in love with it because of Daniel himself, and because of the care poured into every cup and every plate. Instead of competing on price, Daniel decided to invest in what made his cafe special. He introduced a Sunday morning tradition where he read a short story aloud to any children present, something he used to do for Lily at home. Parents began bringing their children specifically for that reason, and slowly the crowd returned, not because the coffee was cheaper, but because the experience could not be replicated anywhere else. During that same winter, Daniel faced another unexpected challenge when Lily became seriously ill with a severe case of pneumonia. He remembers sitting in the hospital waiting room for 3 days straight, barely sleeping, terrified of losing the only family he had left. Tyler and Denise took turns running the cafe during those days without being asked, refusing to accept extra pay, insisting that Daniel needed to focus entirely on his daughter. Harold Whitfield, the elderly customer who visited every morning, left a small envelope of cash at the counter with a note that simply said, "Take care of that little girl. We will take care of the cafe." Lily recovered after nearly 2 weeks, and the first place she asked to visit once she felt strong enough was the cafe. She sat quietly in her favorite corner, wrapped in a blanket, watching her father work, and told him that she wanted to help him paint a new picture of a bird for the wall, one that could represent coming home after a difficult journey. That drawing eventually became one of the most cherished pieces displayed inside Rosewood Café, admired by customers who often asked about the story behind it, never knowing just how close that story came to having a very different ending. As the years passed, Daniel began mentoring young people in the town who wanted to learn about running a small business. He never charged for his advice, remembering how alone he felt when he first attempted this journey without any guidance. A local teenager named Marcus Delgado, who had been struggling to find direction after dropping out of a local trade program, began working weekends at the cafe. Daniel taught him not only how to bake and manage inventory, but also how to treat customers with patience and respect. Marcus eventually saved enough money, with guidance from Daniel, to open his own small bakery 2 years later, and he often credited Rosewood Café as the place where his entire future changed direction. Victoria, during her time away from corporate leadership, spent several months volunteering at a community center in Columbus, an experience that had never crossed her mind before losing her position at Hale Industries. She discovered a genuine sense of purpose in listening to people share their personal struggles, something entirely different from analyzing quarterly earnings reports. It was during this period of reflection that she first heard about Rosewood Café through a mutual acquaintance, though she did not yet realize the connection to her own past. When she finally sat across from Daniel at that counter, and the truth settled between them, it was not simply an apology that passed between two strangers. It was a moment where two very different paths, one built on ambition and one built on resilience, crossed in a small cafe on Maple Street, revealing that both of them had been searching, in very different ways, for the same sense of meaning. In the months that followed their reunion, Victoria often brought her young nephew, Ethan, to the cafe on weekends, watching him laugh alongside Lily as they compared their drawings of birds and other small creatures. Watching the two children together, Victoria began to understand something she had never fully grasped during her years running a large company. That true wealth was measured not in profit margins, but in the quiet, ordinary moments shared between people who genuinely cared for one another. Daniel eventually expanded Rosewood Café to a third location, this time inside the very town where Hale Industries was headquartered. On opening day, a long line formed outside the door before sunrise, filled with former co-workers who remembered Daniel from his years at the company, along with new customers who had only heard stories about the man who turned a painful layoff into something beautiful. Victoria stood quietly near the back of the crowd that morning, not as an investor seeking attention, but simply as a friend proud of what Daniel had built. Lily, now a teenager, often helped design the interior of each new location, insisting that every single cafe include a wall dedicated to children's artwork, a tradition she started with her own bird drawings years earlier. She once told a local newspaper reporter that her father taught her the most important lesson of her life without ever saying it directly, that losing something you love does not mean your story is finished. It simply means a new chapter is about to begin. If you made it this far, thank you for staying until the end of this story. Stories like this remind us that every person we meet, every decision we make, and every hardship we face can eventually lead to something meaningful if we simply choose to keep moving forward. If this story touched you in any way, consider sharing it with someone who might need a little hope today, and let me know in the comments. Which part of this story stayed with you the most?